I'm talking with Tom Owen of Owen Forensic Services, one of the top forensic audio companies in the United States. Tom, thanks for doing the interview.
It's good to talk to you.
Okay. You were the chief engineer at the Rodgers and Hammerstein Archives of Recorded Sound at Lincoln Center in Manhattan. And I should mention to the students that that's not like a collection of old Oklahoma and Sound of Music recordings, that Rodgers and Hammerstein donated the funding for this institution. And basically what it's an historic tour of all the recording devices and recordings made through history, from the Edison cylinder through wire recorders and even to tape.
Yeah, it's the second largest archive in the world, next to the Library of Congress.
Wow, so is that where you first started dealing with audio restoration?
Every media that's been invented, I had access to, and then that goes back to tinfoil, Thomas Edison and tinfoil.
Oh, yeah.
When I was at Rodgers and Hammerstein, I basically ran 4 recording studios and transfer studios, which did not so much enhancement, but transfer of all these old materials. So we had to have all the old machines.
Wow.
Because they were recorded vertically, some had vinyl on them, some had acetate, shellac. All sorts of materials have been in existence since the 1880s. And we had it all, including a half a dozen forms of the earliest tape, magnetic tape, paperback tape, all sorts of variations on the tape media, many of which many of your students have never seen or have never.
Most of them haven't even seen quarter-inch tape, but I know the original tape the guy brought back from Germany when he appropriated the iFarben tape and the recorder, that was all paperback.
Yeah, that was Jack, and they should know this because there's a disc that they can obtain from the AES. Jack Mullins,
right,
who sent his sister piece by piece the old mag for recorders. And they were basically the earliest version of what we know today, although now we use AC bias and other stuff. But that was basically what allowed tape recording to become a commercially viable entity right after the war through Ampex and other people.
Yeah, he got the gig doing Bing Crosby's show.
He was Bing Crosby's personal engineer,
yep.
And Crosby was a very smart businessman, and Crosby got the exclusive on Ampex recorders. And so every show, but then they used to make 16-inch acetates, right, and fly them from coast to coast on a daily basis. So obviously that's real expensive. And so when tape came out and the machines became commercially available, that's when Crosby got the exclusive. And most people don't know this, but Mullen was one of Ampex's earliest people, as well as Ray Dolby and a few other people.
I didn't know Dolby was part of that group.
Oh, yeah, that's where he gets his bona fide, so to speak, about tape and so forth. He worked there as a very young man, and needless to say, he did well for himself.
Yeah. That's when you first started doing audio restoration, right? So you finally said, gee, there could be some money made in this thing, right?
Right, well, what happened, my story is this. I was in the record business with you back in Kentucky, and you and I and a lot of people had bands at the time, and that's where I learned about fixing amps and stuff like that. So I got my electrical degree, so to speak, on the street. And basically, because I had to fix things just like you did. And as a result of that, when I came to New York in 1972, I came as the music director of a Broadway show. And that show failed and closed after 30 days. And then I got a job at a CBS affiliate called CTI Records. And that's when I was a road engineer for about a year and a half, going all over the country with the CTI All-Star Band. And your people won't know anything about that, but some of the names were George Benson and Stanley Turrentine and all sorts of jazz, not rock jazz, but what did they call it?
Progressive jazz, perhaps.
Yeah, but whatever. You know, it basically was sort of like jazz with a kind of a rock beat. And that was the label that featured that and started that in New York City, and they were at Rockefeller Center. So I worked there for a couple of years. And then I worked for a company in Jersey, which basically, they would buy up labels, and I would remaster and remake albums and stuff for them, and that lasted about 8 years. And a lot of those albums, if you go to a vinyl store anywhere in the United States, you'll still see my name on some of those albums. I made over 900 of them.
Gee.
And that was everybody from Ronnie Millsap to Dionne Warwick to Rita Coolidge to everybody who was anybody in the 50s and 60s and 70s.
So why did I remaster your record? You should have done it.
I've been out of that for a long time. You did a great job on it, and I couldn't have done that. Remastering is much different from forensic remastering, so to speak, and we call it enhancement because you're using the basically same equipment with few exceptions, but you're doing a completely different emphasis. You're not emphasizing when you remaster a record, it's not for intelligibility purposes,
right,
for a lot of other purposes. And when we remaster or enhance an audio tape, a bad 911 call or a bad recording, we're basically looking for intelligibility enhancement, not necessarily dynamic range or any of that.
I occasionally will do forensic stuff too. I don't know why. I guess we have a listing on our website that we kind of do that, but we do one job every couple of months. I have very limited tools. I just use Pro Tools, and I've got whatever EQ I can mess with, and Pro Tools has their dinner noise reduction. But you've got Cedar, right?
I have a number of tools. I have Cedar. I have special modules to go along with SoundForge. I also have Pro Tools. I have ECAP, which is personal computer-assisted programming. It's a law enforcement tool for digital adaptive processing, and that's all it does. So it's a dedicated hardware/software-based item just for bad tapes, for forensic tapes. There's other tools available from other companies for various purposes. And then there's the Russian software, which is the best, which is
Really?
the KGB, when they went out of business, when Russia so-called went capitalistic, 15 years ago, all the KGB guys got fired. They just lost their jobs, the video guys and the audio guys, so they went out and opened up businesses.
I didn't know that. That's very cool.
Yeah, so I found out about this about 15 years ago, and, I wanted to check into their software, and they have a company, the biggest one is called Speech Technology Center, and they were the same people that were making their instrumentation for telephone bugging of the Americans and the non-Russian people that had embassies and so forth in Russia. And so they just utilized this technology and started making commercial software, just selling it to Russians, and selling it to Belgians and selling it to the European market. And then they finally branched out about 1998 or so into the Americas. And they found me and was selling me stuff regarding voice identification. Then they told me that they had this stuff to clean up tapes. And so I said, well, send me a copy and I'll test it. And it just blew everything away.
Wow.
It's called Sound Cleaner. And I bought that, and a few years later they came out with a program to detect edits. And it's called Edit Tracker, and then they came out with a wraparound program for that, did a few other things called SIS, and that's an abbreviation of some 3 very long Russian words, which I pronounce.
People have asked me, is there any way to prove this tape has been edited? And I didn't have a clue. I said, you can kind of tell sometimes if the ambience drastically changes, but I can't say conclusively it's been an edit, but this thing actually is pretty good for that, huh? The Edit Tracker?
Yeah, it does narrowband phase analysis, which is the only really way to effectively and conclusively do any kind of edit tracking. You can say, this word is cut off and the context has changed here and all that. Being able to prove it and to show exactly where it was changed and where the context changed, you have to have something that's going to be able to do of extremely high-resolution narrowband scanning of the phase configuration and the slightest change. You're an audio and a video editor, you can make a pretty clean edit. Most of the studios in New York City, that's their advertisement. Our edits are undetected.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not quite true.
Until now.
Most all edits are discoverable. You just have to be able to have the tools to enable you to make that analysis.
Wow.
Which is not Pro Tools or SoundForge. SoundForge will help if you know what you're looking for. In other words, if you use Edit Tracker and you find a spot, then you go back to that timeline on SoundForge and listen to it and look at it, and you probably see it. But if you had to start from the SoundForge perspective alone, we're talking about hard edits. We're not talking about easy stuff where there's a tenth of a millisecond blank space or whatever. Yeah. We're talking about really hard stuff that's been extremely well done. You cannot do that in SoundForge or Pro Tools or any of those commercial programs.
Wow, that's really amazing. I had no idea that technology existed. I leave it to the Russians, huh?
Well, they've always been ahead of us on audio for years. All the spy stuff, all that stuff, they were always way ahead of us in audio. Not so much in video, but especially in audio.
Huh. I never thought of that. That shows you how close I follow the Cold War, But anyway, you started Owl Investigations about, 1981?
Yes.
That was about the same time I started Sound Images, give or take a year. How long did it take you to get established as a forensic audio expert?
I still had my day job at Lincoln Center, so I started doing this in 81. And about 83, I made a contact at the New York City Police Department. I should say they made a contact with me, and I helped them fix some of their tapes that they were having trouble with for free. Of course, when you help somebody and it turns out really well and it doesn't cost them anything, well, then you're the second coming, Until you send somebody a bill, that story.
Yep.
So anyway, we became really good friends. A guy by the name of Gene McDonald, who was in charge down there, he and I became very, very close. And I would do stuff for them, and he would send me these passes to these law enforcement seminars that you couldn't go to unless you were affiliated with an agency. So I'd go to the Javits Center in New York, right down the street from me, and I'd attend these seminars on voice or audio or whatever it was, and I'd take tests and get the little certificates and all the rest of it. And I left Lincoln Center in 1989, so it lasted up until about 88 or so when he left NYPD. So I quit my day job, so to speak, in 1989. And just from that point on, I've had my own business, never really done anything else except the forensic audio or video and the voice ID. The money difference between studio business and the money that I was making was so great.
Oh, I bet. When somebody's going to go to jail, they're liable to pay a lot.
They're paying their lawyers about $25,000 per felony count. So if you get a drug dealer who's got 15 felonies that he's facing, think about the money that the lawyer's making. So, and the experts, which lawyers will tell you are always overpaid. That's not true, but that's what the lawyers say. But the bottom line is, I'm sitting here in about $500,000 worth of toys, and toys that nobody else wants because you couldn't use half of what I have here in your recording studio.
Oh, for sure. I wouldn't know how.
Here maybe you would, but, as far as on a daily basis, no, you wouldn't use it. You would have no need to use it.
Well, how much of your work involves just making tapes intelligible, and how much of your work is actually voice print identification?
Voice print, I do about 50 cases a year. That's one a week, and that's a lot. That's more than anybody else that I know of.
Wow.
But after doing several thousand, you get pretty good at it.
Oh, I bet.
And I'm a certified examiner, and I train people, and the next month I'm training several people from Homeland Security, and they're going to go through the whole voice ID training, and eventually, hopefully, they'll get certified and so forth. But basically, it's about a 2-year span that it takes you to get certified in voice identification.
Since it's a subject that's not even in the textbook that we're using, I went to your website and read the paper on it, but explain briefly, if you can, what goes on with voice print identification.
Your voice is a biometric item within yourself, just like your DNA and your fingerprints and so forth. And the voice has been used, for centuries, going back to the Bible times. And Saul and Esau, and the father touched one of them and listened to them and could tell which one was which by their voice and so forth. And it was first used in a case in Scotland Yard. But the reason it's so important is it's just like a fingerprint. It's one of the few things that you have that is totally to you. Your voice is different than if you have a brother or your brothers, or in my own case, I have a twin brother, and my voice is, even though we're twins and we sound quite a bit alike, we're still different when you look at the spectrograms or the visual representation of your voice. So everybody is different. I've never found anybody to be exactly the same. No, neither has anyone else. It's just like your fingerprints. You don't find anybody that's exactly the same as you are with your fingerprints.
I've often wondered about, and people have asked this too, if you have a really good mimic, like a Rich Little or somebody who does voices and he's doing Nixon, or his voice print would show up differently than the actual person.
I actually have a video of Rich Little doing exactly that, mimicking various people, and a voice print examiner is doing the voice prints, and then they come up. It's one I put together, and it comes up displayed on the screen. It may sound like Rich Little, but it doesn't look like Rich Little on tape.
Okay, the Homeland Security gives you a tape of supposedly bin Laden, and they want you to authenticate it. Where do you get the control samples?
Well, when I did the real bin Laden in 2002, that's exactly what happened. I got the control sample from a 1998 interview by Jonathan Miller, who's a correspondent, with bin Laden sitting in a tent. It was a videotape. Mm-hmm. So we know it's bin Laden. We know it's his voice. It was a lengthy, 20-some-odd minutes, at least that's the portion I had, 20-some-odd minutes of him answering all sorts of questions. And bin Laden has a very, very distinctive pattern to his voice and rhythm to his voice, as well as the manner in which he speaks. So I did all sorts of testing, and there's a program called Multi-Speech where you can test, how much space we'll put between their words, and how many meters per second, meaning beats per second, meaning voice. The human male is 130 vibrations per second of your vocal cords. That's how normal, that's the normal pitch of a human male. Mm-hmm. And so you back all these numbers into a program, and it pops out some control figures and says that this person, when they speak in a normal tone of voice, has X vibrations at X pitch. Their vocal tracking, it measures like 28 parameters.
Wow.
So you take all these measurements and you say, okay, this is the numerical, statistical equivalent of Osama bin Laden. And then you listen to him and you say, this is how he sounds and then you listen to them, and this is the 2002 message, which was 4 minutes long, and see if any of that stuff matches. There were 4 words that were the same that he spoke in that 4-minute message that were on that Jonathan Miller interview, and those were matched, as well as all those other statistical parameters were matched. So they've done a lot of work on bin Laden's voice right after I published that thing. And it was published in all sorts of magazines, Scientific American.
That's what I was going to say. You've written 5 books and over 100 technical articles. I mean, when do you sleep?
Well, I'm always forced to. It's always because of a conference that's coming up. Technical writers will tell you this. It's so hard because you don't get paid for doing this. I mean, I got paid for the Osama bin Laden stuff, but I'm talking about when you go and you deliver a paper at a conference or something, nobody pays you for that.
Oh.
So that means you got to do it for free, which means that takes away the time that you would be making money doing stuff for free. And having lived in New York City for the last 37 years or so, I'm not used to doing stuff for free.
Yeah, it's kind of a high cost of living there. But I suppose the idea is if you blow them away at a conference, you're able to get a bunch of new customers maybe.
And also, if you're involved in these organizations like I am, I'm involved heavily with the forensic part of the Audio Engineering Society.
You're the president of some of these.
The chairman of the standards group, and I got to write stuff for that, and I got to write stuff for another board that I'm on, which has to do with forensic audio and video and voice ID. So, the old saying in the Army, never volunteer. When you raise your hand to be the chairman or whatever, they elect you. In those cases, I was elected, and I wasn't running. So that was a situation where, for the American College of Forensic Examiners, that's the case. The AES, I actually started the forensic audio group in 92.
Oh, wow.
That's when the people that were in charge of the AES at the time were very interested in it. Tom Stockham and Jay McKnight, the Watergate people. They had a great fondness for the forensic stuff because they were the ones that were hired in 72 to do the Watergate 18.5. Yeah. That's the birth of forensic audio as we know it today.
The Watergate tape where they...
The 18.5-minute gap examination. And you should tell your students that the report from that group is available online at the AES under the Historical Committee. So if they go to the AES, I think you have to be a member, I'm not sure. If they're not members and they like this stuff, they should be a member of the Audio Engineering Society.
Yeah, we had a local chapter for a while, and it just kind of fizzled out. Did they find anything and when they were analyzing the 18-minute gap? They
found that it had been erased 9 times, at least.
Oh, not just one time, but 9 times. So it wasn't an accident.
No, it wasn't an accident. Years later, I think somebody said that there was a Secret Service agent that was named as the person who actually did it. I don't know if that's true or not, because stuff like that gets started, and sometimes it's not true. But the bottom line was, it was erased, and I don't know what was on it or anything like that. But, it was erased, and so this was at a time when, in 72, was when they had the panel, so it was erased before that. It was during the Vietnam War, and I believe it was about the Vietnam War. That's my personal opinion.
Wow.
And I think it was Halderman who was the one he was talking to, and Nixon was talking to Halderman. But your students can get the technical report for free by being in the AES and by going under the Historical Committee and downloading the entire thing.
Oh, very cool.
It is very cool, and it's a historical document.
Yeah, I mean, it's not fiction. This is actually something that happened, and I think that's neat. I've only had to testify as an expert witness once in a forensic job. In fact, this is how lame I was. I didn't even know which side of the case I was on. Somebody gave me the tape, but it was pretty intelligible. I mean, I said, what do you want me for? You couldn't understand this. But you said the first time you were ever in court, they tried to beat you up pretty badly, right? The other side tried to discredit you.
Remember, I came in early on. I testified the first time, I think it was 1983 or 82 or something like that. And they tried to get on me because I was a musician. Okay. Those people, and they tried to get on me because I had published a book about playing the banjo, and I had backed up a bunch of artists and so forth and so on, all of which had absolutely nothing to do with the actual testimony I was giving about the tape I worked on. So they were attacking me personally because in their mind they thought it would be a good idea that the jury would not be sympathetic to a musician or to someone who had been involved in the music business for a long time. And the fact that I didn't have any formal training in forensic audio, because back then there was no formal training.
Yep, you're a pioneer.
Now I'm considered one of the old-timers, but at the time I was one of the newer people. The newer people who worked at a place that had the wherewithal and the tools and the equipment to be able to do this work. And I made it a fast study because I could see that was my future.
You told me, though, I think that you took a class on how to deal with cross-examinations and...
No, there were no classes on cross-examinations. I just took a class in the courtroom.
Oh, okay.
I was the subject. I was the
Exhibit A.
Exhibit A. And the first couple times I testified was not bad. But then I got into a big federal trial, and it was as acrimonious as you can ever imagine. And it went from, how many times did you beat your wife kind of stuff? You know, you were a musician. Did you ever smoke marijuana? Did you graduate from college? Well, no lawyer worth anything asks a question that he doesn't already know the answer to. But I guess they thought in front of the jury that they would get some play with this, you know. And if they're going to heckle, they better be good at it, because both of us, and I don't know if your students know this or not, both of us have actually played places that had chicken wire in front of the bandstand. At the Golden Horseshoe in
Yeah, like the Blues Brothers movie.
Like the Blues Brothers movie, you know. And so we go back, and we've been heckled by the best, and dodging the beer bottles and the bullets and so forth. So if somebody's going to heckle me when I'm on the witness stand, they better watch out, because I don't consider myself a professional comic, but I've been around long enough to know how to dodge these bullets.
You've testified, what you told me, in about 40 states?
41 states, over 300 times.
Wow. So how much of your life do you spend in a courtroom?
Oh, it used to be a lot more, because when I'm involved, a lot of times they settle. They don't go to court. Sometimes they hire me just so the other side won't. Which is an easy way to make a living.
Yeah, I guess it'd be a conflict of interest to be working for both sides. Huh?
Henry Lee's a good friend of mine, and he's probably the premier forensic scientist in the world. You know, not in this area, but in blood spatter and all that stuff. And that's what they do with him all the time. When they have a big case and they have money, the first thing they do is they go hire him. Whether they use him or not, it matters.
But just so the other side can't hire.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. You also do video restoration. Now, is it, again, the same Russian software, or is it...
No, it's not. It's people that make software basically for... They don't call it restoration. They call it enhancement or analysis or authenticity. And most of the video that I do is the kind of video where... I got one recently where it's dark out, it's pitch black at 3 a.m. outside a club, and somebody gets run over by a car, and they want to know the license plate on the car because it drives by in front of the camera on the nightclub, or they want to know how many people were in the car, or whatever. So we use filters, and they want to know a timeline. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of video enhancement that I do. Making video brighter or darker or whatever is an easy thing to do that you can do with the video that comes with your computer.
Sure.
But now you can buy a system from Avid, or you can buy a system from Signalscape or from Salient Stills for about $18,000, and you can do all sorts of other things as well. You can do photogrammetry, and you know, how tall is that guy coming through the door? Well, you know the door is 7'2" or 8 feet tall, and he goes through standing up straight. You can get his height by using the door.
Oh, wow.
And there's a science to that, and there's a manner in which to do that, and there's software that'll enable you to do it. So you punch in the height of the door, it'll draw you a door. You punch in the height of the suspect, it'll put the suspect coming through the door. It's almost like accident reconstruction, only you're doing it with real people and real suspects.
Wow. It's kind of like the movie The Italian Job, where the computer guy was trying to figure out which one of the armored cars had the gold in it, and they were checking the tires, and they got the measurements, the metrics out on the screen.
I quit being the movie consultant to CSI Miami because of the liberties they were taking with the video. I actually wrote some of the scripts for that show in the scenes where they were doing forensic video.
I was going to ask you about that. CSI Miami and also Law and Order, right?
Well, actually all of them at one time or another. Lie to Me, CSI, Miami, New York, and Vegas. I started with the Vegas people, with Ann Donahue. She got a hold of me when they did the pilot. And because, I don't know if you were a fan of that show, but the very first 5 or 6 shows, they all dealt with voice identification and audio analysis and background analysis. Mm-hmm. And I was the one who was involved with that through Ann Donahue, who was the writer. Then I started dealing with David Berlin, the mortuary guy that you see on, you know, he's the one that comes and collects the body in the Las Vegas CSI. Well, he started out appearing here and there. Now he's in every episode. And his brother Josh is the producer of 4 or 5 other shows. Oh. So I just made friends with them and Ann Donahue in the very beginning, and I started getting... You see, once you get on these databases, everybody calls you. Everybody calls you.
You've also been a consultant to, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox. I mean, have you ever been on camera as a pundit, or do they just ask you for analysis? Or
Yeah, I've been on camera 3 or 4 times here in New York, and then that gets picked up by the affiliates. You know, because the New York station is the station, and then sometimes the affiliates will pick it up and insert their own people in, their own, quote, anchors, And so you may see a show about forensics, especially during the Osama bin Laden stuff. You'd see a show, and it says that we have an expert. This is out of our New York office, and Tom Owen's going. Then they'll ask me questions because, see, it's shot. Most of them are shot separately. You appear in a window, and they ask you a question. When you might be at a substation in Secaucus, New Jersey, like I was, and, instead of going into New York City.
Yes.
Or they would come here. They would come here, and they would film me in my office. And they would make it appear that I was there with them.
Yeah, And it's their voice asking the question, even though somebody else may have asked you the question before. Yeah.
Right. And their people will ask the question, and then I'll answer the question. That's why they don't say, until the end, don't say, thank you, so-and-so. Thank you. They say, don't say that at the end, because we may have to use this elsewhere.
You've also been featured on, Dateline and 60 Minutes, too, right?
Yeah, I did 60 Minutes 3 times. I did Dateline 3 or 4 times. And Dateline was a whole show about several things that happened. And they actually had a video of me in court on the Lieutenant Barton case. They had me in court doing my shtick. And then 60 Minutes was where this guy confessed on screen. They said, we have an expert who says, that's your voice as Ray Renfro and Joe Smith and Harry so-and-so. And the guy said, on screen, yes, that's true. That's me. I'm all those voices. And, of course, this was a huge federal investigation into wire fraud. This guy from Nigeria, you know about Nigerian scams, money.
Yeah, yeah.
He scammed Merrill Lynch, Prudential, American Express, Citibank out of I don't know how many millions of dollars. And he admitted, and he did it under these other names, out of his basement. So they went to him on screen, and he got a confession on screen. It's the only time it's ever happened on 60 Minutes.
Based on your voice print analysis, then?
Based on the analysis, because I told him that this guy is all these people. I also did the Lady Di tape, where she was on the telephone with that guy talking about the rest of the royal family, which was kind of hysterical. They never played the whole tape to the public, and they didn't want to destroy her invincibility or angelic
her image, yes,
image thing. At first they said it wasn't her, and then one of the tabloids hired me, and I ID'd her from using voice analysis, and then after that, then they tried to bury it.
Wow. So my question is, if you've done all this consulting, why do they, on the cop shows, flip a switch and suddenly the audio is just like it's been recorded in a studio,
I tell you what they tell me. When I ask them that very same question, they would say, well, it moves the story along, and it's... I said, yeah, but it's all wrong, especially with the video stuff they do. Yeah. And they says, well, it's for dramatic effect.
There was a Simpsons episode the other night where they were looking at a monitor, and Bart says, Lisa, magnify and enhance, and she pushes his head closer to the screen.
It's really smoke and mirrors when you see the video on these shows. They really overdo the video stuff.
Well, Tom, thank you for taking time to do this. This is so cool. I'm sure that, again, forensic audio was probably under the radar of most of the students. They probably didn't have a clue what it was, except if they watched cop shows. But it's neat that you've had this much success with it. In fact, believe it or not, this is the truth. When occasionally, say every couple of months, somebody will bring me a tape to try to enhance. And most of the time, I can't even tell if there's people on it, they're that bad. And I always tell them, if I can't achieve the result that they want, I can get them in touch with the guy that's the best in the country. So I don't think I've sent you any work because none of them probably can afford you. But
well, as I've been known to say on occasion, we can work something.
Tom, thank you again.
All right, Jay, take care.
Very good.
Thanks for having me. Goodbye.